my monthly
one of the contractors.
periodic oversight report. I'm here once a month for the next few months. I don't know how long yet. And here to present this report to you. You have hard copy, and I apologize that we're having some technical difficulty. As soon as we get that straightened out, we'll put it on up here. But we do need to move forward, and so let me go ahead and ask you to work with me in terms of the pages. So if you go to page 2, that's just basically the content. We're just going to talk about some comments on the progress of the project. We're going to talk about an early victory strategy, tracking of the audit findings that we generated, risk mitigation, spend tracking, and some observations about the project team. So if you go to page 3, you'll see we're going to talk about progress.
There's no copies for the public.
There is a couple of copies floating around. If not, you're welcome to have mine.
There's other people who.
I understand. Most of them are my kids. They're okay.
So if you take a look at on page 4, this is sort of an update of the near-term targets. This is sort of the outlook that's been presented and generated by the team, and you can see that they've got a sort of their activities laid out in order, and you can see that they're fairly similar in their restatement of the SAP standard methodology, and in essence, they're suggesting the arrow at the top is telling you that's where we are today. So the whole revitalization activities are pretty much concluded. They've gotten their funding for the next month or two, so they can get moving. They're basically saying that from April to mid-May is when they'll be focusing on the preparation phase. Then they will do the as-built documentation. Will be up until July, and then trying to track and do the 2B blueprint and try to make sure that they've got all the changes and so forth that have occurred. Need to document all those, and that'll basically end in September. So actual testing, data loading, and all that sort of thing with regard to implementing the software will start in September. What we've shown you below that is that at that point in time, as you are trying to go forward, you are going to hit the holiday period, and so it looks like you're not going to see much until 2016. Okay? And that's still to be defined and planned. If you take a look at page 5, several major dependencies have occurred that everybody needs to be aware of. And if you look down below, the Kronos project, the consolidation of Kronos now, is part of the Synergy project, but it definitely represents a dependency because you've got to get all of that ready, and you're going to actually feed time into PeopleSoft so people get paid, and then you're going to have to move it to SAP. So that's what it shows down there is the timekeeping phases of work. You see the rollout to PeopleSoft is at near the end, and then you've got to migrate that to SAP. So there is a dependency there that's fairly significant so people can get paid. We also have the software upgrade has been included in there. Everybody has come to the conclusion that we need to upgrade the software before we go live with the new system. So that's a fairly major dependency. And there are some issues with regard to exactly which technology and what technology approach needs to be taken with regard to the infrastructure. That's going to take some time for the next 3 months or so. Okay? If we look on page 6, here are just some observations about that, and I think I've mentioned these already. The hardware software infrastructure upgrade is a major dependency and it's facing a lengthy analysis, about 3 months, to resolve and select the appropriate direction. So we need to realize that that's happening. The consolidation project, I think with Kronos, the thing we need to be aware of is that in order for you to pay people in PeopleSoft, the issue of whether or not time evaluation is done in Kronos or SAP is a moot point. It needs to happen in Kronos in order for you to pay people in PeopleSoft, which will occur before PeopleSoft's payroll is ready to go. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, if you decide to move it into SAP, that's fine. You've got plenty of time to figure that out. The SAP budget preparation module, you purchased that module, but it doesn't really appear to be in your overall implementation strategy. Probably need to be aware that it's out there and need to figure out, do you or don't you include it in your implementation strategy? That's an addition. Okay, currently it's not being included and in your plans, and SAP didn't look at it during their audit either, that particular module.
It's a good time to take a little break for just a second. I have a couple questions. If there's anybody else, I can go with them first, but is there anybody that we need to ask anything? The Kronos discussion that you're having, we empowered sort of the administration and the executive team to do that. If you go back to your page 4 chart, then is Kronos then going to appear inside the preparation side of this action target?
It actually would be going on parallel to that.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what it shows on page 5. Those activities are in essence parallel to preparation, and it's a separate and distinct activity, and so it's not impacting anything on SAP at that particular point.
The other thing, and it's not to be critical of your information, you obviously, in your work processes, you've polled several folks or multiple people. Can you just briefly describe where you're getting your status information and the expectation of work?
Well, I'm
plan?
getting copies of their. I mean, I have copies of
Okay.
their strategic program management plan, I guess is what's being called, and that's where a lot of this information is. I have just paraphrased it. Okay?
Down into the work teams.
And then I have met with all of the project managers this
Okay.
week.
All right. And then I could only add to perhaps the budget preparation module. You know, we have a first quarter budget amendment, we have end of year budget building, and all of the other things. I think it's perhaps expected that's not a high priority.
Well,
And-
granted, I mean, it's not something you would not do right away. More than likely, and you'll see that as we go into this a little further, it becomes a secondary activity, a phase 2, if you will.
Fair enough.
Okay?
Okay. Any other questions at this part of the presentation?
No, thank you.
We'll probably go 5 minutes after 12, just
Okay.
put people on notice with that.
On page 7, one of the things.
I'm sorry, Mr. Starr, there's a meeting at
Okay.
12. The regulation of marijuana meeting is from 12 to 1.
Good.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll not then. We'll just be ready to be done at whatever. I've been asked for 5 minutes by the administration. If we can, great. If not, this is for the Assembly's purpose today.
Okay. In the original assessment report that Zico put together, we talked about some early victories. In fact, we even talked about early chunks of work, if you recall. And we suggested that there were some very good candidates for that. And that's on page 8. You see the list of, in essence, all the modules, the SAP modules. And, we had mentioned last month that the ones with the orange arrow were the ones that SAP had said they're pretty close to done. I mean, they were pretty close. And that they were good, strong candidates. If they could be very good, strong candidates to literally turn on and have people use them on a pretend sandbox kind of basis. Okay, there would be no production data. It's not a go live, and they would not be fully tested from an integration perspective, but they would be workable, so people could actually try them. And it is a way for this organization to get an early victory, to get something early. And we're talking about midsummer time frame here as opposed to 2016.
Ms. Gray Jackson has a question for
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Zig. Okay, on line number 7, General Ledger, that's the module acronym. What's the module name? Because you can't see it.
I'm sorry, it is the general ledger.
Right, but what's the module name that you can't see?
General Ledger.
General ledger.
Oh, it says General Ledger?
Yeah, it's
Oh, okay, I get it. I
Yeah, I'm
see.
sorry. I just
Okay.
kind of laid that on top. You had this in last month's report, this exact
Right,
same chart
but I
was
couldn't
in
see
the
it
report.
today.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So on page 9, we're basically saying, so what are some of those potential chunks? We've just identified which ones they might be, and we're basically saying, and we're showing with that arrow, about where they would be ready and they could be, in essence, turned on. So you could have, around midsummer, you could have something that's actually available for people to work with. Okay? Page 10, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the functional view of the implementation. Most of these charts that you've looked at are basically phases of work, which is following the SAP standard approach, referred to as ASAP, and it's all, in essence, phases of work with various checkpoints and gateways to determine when you should move forward and so forth. What it does not do is it does not look at it from a functional perspective. And so I wanted to at least have us take a look at this and think about and realize that the very front end of these activities I think of as being holistic and cross-functional. So they're looking at everything. Okay? When you get into the back half, when you get into realization and preparation and so forth, and getting ready to go live, you are now looking at these things functionally. You're now looking at them in terms of the financial piece, the human resources piece. You with me?
I am only to the question of, and I was distracted just for a minute, on the functional pieces ready to go, does that include documentation? Because there was some significant criticisms about documentation.
That's
not
all in
being
the front end. That's
Okay.
all in that front piece. Absolutely.
fair
That's
enough.
all that's happening over the next few months is going to be documentation.
Got you. Joined by Chairman Trainee and
Okay.
Assemblymember Hall.
So if you take a look at this entire implementation from a functional perspective, page 11, you now see in the upper left-hand corner, you see that, I'm calling it revitalize. I mean, everybody started calling it the revitalization plan, but that's the activities of doing all the documentation, catching up, doing the as-built configuration work. All of that's going on until September of 2015. That's what's in their plan. Okay? Parallel to that, you have Kronos consolidation. Parallel to that, you have software infrastructure upgrade. So those things are all going on parallel. When you get to September 15, give or take, you now can look at these things functionally. So I'm suggesting that you can look at the rest of the implementation as being the financial piece. Some people refer to it as FILO, but it's the financial side. Okay? General ledger, control, accounts payable, purchasing, that sort of thing. Parallel to that is human resources, which is now referred to it as HCM. But you'll notice that it's longer. Most of the information, from the SAP audit is suggesting that a lot of the financial pieces are in pretty good shape. Okay, they're in pretty good shape, so they probably are going to get finished and can be finished much more timely than HCM. HCM will probably take orders of magnitude twice as long. Okay? Also, notice a parallel to that, we're looking at, that's when you bring in Kronos to the SAP module so you can generate payroll. Okay? And then there's the piece that's sitting out there as that potential phase 2. If you finish the financial piece earlier than HCM, you can take those folks that are working on the financial piece and they can work on the budget prep piece.
Are you doing all on time? You're fine, even with a couple more questions, or are you getting tight?
I should be okay.
Have you had a chance to look at the hardware factors at all as it relates to our ability to put it into hardware mix?
Certainly have not assessed it. I'm aware of what the analysis is and what folks are looking at as options, but I haven't assessed it.
It's no change order authorized in that.
Okay, on page 13, just basically, rather than spending any time on this, I've just recapped for you the condition of the responses, okay? And there are, I think the key thing to notice is that 80 of the 156 items have March target dates. So I will be looking at their adequacy of completion. In other words, I will be looking at that in next month's report. I will go through all 80 of those items and basically say, have we done them or haven't we? Okay? Because those are all, in essence, agreed to items that administration says they will do. Okay? So I just wanted to highlight that for you as we move forward. On page 14, this is repeating what I just said. The bulk of the items are targeted for March completion and are in progress, which is a good thing. Okay? The 80, and then I will basically follow up on each of those 80 items, and they will be in the next month's report.
For this purpose, Ms.
Yeah,
Jackson?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a really, really quick question. We're talking about March completion. We only have a few days left in March.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thought on the ability for this to happen?
Well, a good portion of it truly are in process. I mean, I think that we're gonna be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, we're talking about 80 of 156 for
Yeah, but
modernization.
some of those are pretty straightforward items. Yeah, they're not huge.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Risk mitigation, if you look on page 16, in that draft synergy revitalization plan, there were 30 risks that the team had identified. That's a lot. And so it creates a lot of complexity, and it means there's a lot of things to pay attention to. And so all we're suggesting is, okay, pay attention to those and make sure you track on all 30 of those risks. Although we did find a couple of risks that we thought were subjective as opposed to being objective. I mean, an example is documentation is not thorough. Well, what's thorough? Okay, so we just think that you might want to be a little more objective rather than subjective on something like that. And we are suggesting that the new program manager needs to include risk mitigation tracking in his program management plan. Okay? I'd like to talk a little bit about change and change management on page 17. The OCM and training group in our examination back in January and February, we said, hey, they're not involved. They're not part of the team they need to be. That's a change that has been made. That's good. But we need to make sure we all realize that the OCM project manager in that role is now open. So that person is not involved. And that a contractor has been looked at as that particular role, and we would urge you not to do that. We would urge you that the OCM manager truly should be a Muni employee. And that needs to be a person who is not at will, a person who's going to continue, who's going to be around, and has credibility. Okay, now, if you have a skill issue with that individual, that's where you put the contractor. You come up with a deputy OCM manager, and you provide the skills if you need to. That would be our recommendation there. With regard to spend, we took a look at weekly spend. We've got the 3 most recent weeks in weekly spend. You've got eight contracts that you're tracking on that weekly spend. You just signed the SAP contract, so that's really not involved and not included right now. It will be. That immediately is going to start pushing your weekly spend up. We did notice that there were some discrepancies between the calculated balances and the purchase order balances. So there were 3 out of the 7 entries that had discrepancies. Obviously, that shouldn't happen, especially if you're looking at stuff on a weekly basis. I mean, that's short enough time period that you ought to be able to stay on top of that. So without SAP, that weekly run rate right now is at about $100,000 a week. You need to be recognized that that's going to jump, and that's going to jump significantly over the next few weeks. In terms of the financials, overall project cost, we looked at it through February. Very little change in the comments that we had made. In essence, you've used up all your funds, but now, of course, we have a change that's not reported here, and that is the last meeting you guys, basically approved, some significant increases in the funding. So that's a good thing, and everybody can get working. With regard to the team, we had some observations about the team last month, and this month we have better news. In other words, we were concerned about the project managers were not coalesced. They were kind of disjointed. I would say to you that the project managers have coalesced quite well. So it's a strong group, and they're working together well. I think it's a good thing. And of course, you now have a new program manager started, so the whole leadership issue is becoming resolved. Okay, so you now have a group that I'm sort of referring to as the triumvirate. You got a program manager and 2 deputy program managers. Okay, and so those folks now can take an awful lot of burden off of the project managers so that the project managers can get to work. And quite frankly, that's what they want. Okay. With regard to project managers, I did speak with all of them this week except for 2. And I I think, their perception is and their consensus is they've spent the last 6 weeks basically reacting to political pressures. Okay? I mean, that's just their consensus and how they, but then again, that probably has helped them coalesce, quite frankly. But I will tell you this, every one of them are ready to get to work. They want to get to work. They're tired of planning. Okay? But they are in essence frustrated by the fact that they're planning to plan to plan to plan. So it's time to start generating something. Okay, and I think they're all pretty happy that there's been some funding and that we can move forward. And some of the project managers were a little bothered by the fact that there's an awful lot of top-down direction. They would rather see guidance as opposed to detailed directing. Okay?
What are your feelings on that?
I'm already on record. The assessment report basically said I thought that the functional steering committee was way too involved in the details. That was the original recommendation in February. If you take a look at page 23, we took a look at all the contracts. Now we're missing 2 of the contracts. We should have them today. But we listed for you all the contracts and basically said, okay, how many POs are involved, how many change orders are involved, what the start date and the termination dates are, and how many resources are involved. No surprise, the Peloton is the one that's got the most resources. The last 4 columns are the ones that I'd like to bring your attention to. I mean, we had said earlier in our original report that we were concerned that you were not holding your contractors' feet to the fire, that you needed deliverables. If you look at your contracts and the condition they're in today, and I realize there are changes going on, but in the condition they're in today, there are very few documented deliverables or expectations of the contractors. So there's a lot of cost plus going on, that kind of thing. And remember, we're talking about what's active today. We're not talking about what you had a year ago. Okay? We just think that needs to be rectified. And the easiest way to rectify that is get a statement of work, attach the work plan, so you recognize that there are assignments of things that they're supposed to do so you can hold their feet to the fire. The last 3 are in the contracts, the way people are being scheduled and the way they're reporting time and the way they're getting reimbursed for expenses. Our message here is it's not consistent. It needs to be consistent, because you've got some people working until 5 and then traveling on the weekends. Other contractors are leaving at noon.
Zig, you're inside of 3 minutes. I will have to cut you off at noon
Okay.
based on our public schedule.
Okay? I would just then go to page 27. On page 26, I provided for you a definition of systems integrator, because we talked earlier about systems integration and the fact that takes on some responsibility for the end result. And our contention is that you don't have a systems integrator. And so we are saying that no single contracted organization is responsible and accountable for the successful implementation of Synergy. That's per their current contracts. As such, MOA needs to understand that its leadership is now ultimately responsible and accountable for ensuring the successful completion of the project, not Peloton, not SAP. It's not in their contracts. So you don't have a systems integrator, and I think that's sort of a bottom line major conclusion that we would like to make sure you're aware of.
We get it. The audit committee can certainly function as a clearinghouse of information as necessary. We've got audit committee members here. The audit committee also has members of the administration on it, most notably Kate Guyard. So as we look forward to having additional questions, perhaps outside of this, resources that you have perhaps able to do that, you can probably expect direct questions from either the committee or obviously anybody's welcome to do that. Do you have any suggestions on how to keep us informed over the next month?
I would be happy to just send you, just a listing of observations on a weekly basis.
Are you okay with the way we're paying you to do that? Is that an added burden to you?
As long as it's, about half an hour or so, that's fine. I'm happy to absorb that, and we're fine. I think if you expect me or would like me to come back for an additional week, we're in a change order situation.
Yeah, I don't know that that's entirely necessary at this point. It's just that there's appearing to be quite a bit of flurry of activity, and you've done a nice job in sort of keeping us inside that loop without being overburdening to the executive branch of government. So with that said, noon o'clock, thank you.